When my grandfather, Joe Miller, passed away last March, I inherited his 200-acre farm just outside the sleepy town of Meadow Creek. The land has been in our family for generations, a place where summers meant chasing fireflies and fall brought the harvest of corn and soybeans. Living 5 hours away, I didn't visit as often as I should. But I never imagined I would have to fight for something that was already mine. That all changed early one Tuesday morning when I received a panicked phone call from Mrs. Thompson, my grandfather's neighbor of more than 40 years. "Alex, thank God you answered." Her voice trembled, a far cry from the steady woman who'd taught third grade for 38 years before retiring. "They're building houses on your land." "What? There must be some mistake." "No mistake. They've sent bulldozers to tear up the eastern fields. The same fields your grandfather and my Harold used to help each other harvest. I've been calling the county for days, but no one will listen to an old woman." Mrs. Thompson Eleanor, though she'd never let me call her that growing up, had been more than a neighbor to our family. When my mother died young, she was the one who made sure Grandpa and I had home-cooked meals. She never had children of her own, but she kept every school photo I ever gave her displayed proudly on her refrigerator alongside her late husband's military medals. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to Meadow Creek, pushing 80 miles per hour along the back roads I knew by heart. When I finally reached the dirt road leading to my grandfather's house, my heart sank. The familiar scene was being swallowed by clouds of dust and the roar of heavy machinery. A sign read, "Sunny Pines East, 96 luxury homes starting at $450,000. My stomach turned. Grandfather would never sell the farm, loved this land more than life itself. Back at the old farmhouse, I sat alone on the front porch, where I used to drink lemonade with Grandpa Joe on warm Texas evenings. The property around me, 200 acres of legacy, had always felt like home, even if I hadn't spent much time there in recent years. On my way into town the next morning, I passed a small house with boxes piled on the lawn. An elderly man in a wheelchair was watching as movers loaded his belongings into a truck. His American flag still fluttered on a pole nearby, and I noticed a Vietnam veteran's cap on his head. I slowed down, rolling down my window. "Everything okay, sir?" He looked up, his eyes weary. "Sunny Pines HOA gave me 30 days to paint my fence beige according to specifications. On my fixed income, I couldn't afford the special paint they required. Now I'm out after 14 years. He shook his head. "I built this ramp myself after losing my legs in Vietnam. They said it violated the architectural guidelines." His name was Frank Delgado. I wrote it down, something burning inside me. The Sunny Pines office was a sleek building with perfectly manicured landscaping. The receptionist, a young woman with sympathetic eyes, directed me to the HOA president's office. That's where I first met Diane Reynolds. Some people fill a room when they enter it. Diane consumed it. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun, not a strand out of place. Her red blazer matched her lipstick, and the diamonds on her fingers caught the light as she extended her hand without standing. "Mr. Morgan, I understand you have concerns." Her smile never touched her eyes. I explained that there must be some mistake, that the eastern fields were part of my inheritance. "There's no mistake," she said, sliding a folder across her immaculate desk. "Sunny Pines purchased that parcel nearly a year ago. The permits are in order, the boundaries legally approved. Perhaps your grandfather didn't inform you of the sale. But I knew my grandfather, and there was no way he would sell the eastern fields. Not for any amount of money." When Mrs. Thompson later told me he was furious about surveyors showing up with tape measures just weeks before his death, I realized there was only one way to find out the truth: dig into his records. Grandpa's office smelled of cigarette smoke and old books, untouched since the funeral. After hours of searching through drawers of crop records and rainfall logs, I noticed something strange: a loose floorboard underneath the desk. Inside the hidden compartment was a small metal box with a dangling key. My hand shook as I opened it. There lay the original deed to the farm, my grandfather's will naming me sole heir, and a set of yellowed land surveys from 1910. But what caught my attention most was a handwritten letter addressed to me. If you're reading this, it began, someone is trying to take what belongs to us. The letter described how, in his final months, a man claiming to be from Sunny Pines repeatedly pressured him to sign documents all under the guise of minor easements. But Grandpa never signed. He suspected a scam and warned me to compare the original 1910 survey with current county records. The truth lies at the boundary, he wrote. While I compared the surveys, I discovered something shocking. Grandpa's original property wasn't just 200 acres, it was almost 280. At some point, the eastern boundary had mysteriously shifted. The entire Sunny Pines East development and even part of the existing development sat on land we still legally owned. The next day, I visited Walter Franklin, the only property lawyer in Meadow Creek. At 73, Walter had thick glasses and spoke with deliberate slowness, his office cluttered with decades of legal texts and fishing trophies. When I first laid out my case, Walter seemed reluctant. "You're talking about going up against Sunny Pines, son? Diane Reynolds has the county commissioners in her pocket. I need to know if I have a legal case," I insisted. Walter studied the documents for what felt like hours, occasionally muttering to himself. Finally, he leaned back in his chair with a heavy sigh. "Your grandfather came to me 6 months ago," he admitted. "He suspected someone was trying to manipulate the property lines. I told him it would be an uphill battle." Walter removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I've represented this town's families for 47 years. Never lost a land dispute. But I was afraid for Joe. Afraid of what they might do." "What changed your mind?" I asked. Walter's eyes hardened. "Last month, my sister tried to add a small garden shed in her backyard. Diane's HOA fined her $500 for a non-conforming structure. My sister is 80 years old and just wanted a place to store her gardening tools." He put his glasses back on. "But that's nothing compared to what they did to Eliza Winters. 92 years old, lived in her home for 50 years before Sunny Pines built around her. Her great-grandchildren came to stay when her daughter was hospitalized. The HOA rules say visitors can't stay more than 3 days without approval. They fined her $100 per day, and when she couldn't pay, they put a lien on her house. She lost everything, had to move into a nursing home." Walter's voice cracked. "Son, you don't just have a case. You have a righteous cause." Walter helped me apply for an emergency order to halt construction, explaining that county records showed a boundary adjustment had been made in 1997 when my grandfather was in the hospital for triple bypass surgery. The signature on that file barely resembled his. "It wasn't just a mistake," Walter said gravely. "It was fraud. To build a stronger case, I needed to know more about Sunny Pines. What I found at the county records office made my stomach churn. A network of LLCs tied to Diane Reynolds, her husband Thomas, and several high-ranking county officials, including the planning board director and commissioners. As I was leaving the records office, a woman in her mid-30s with curly brown hair approached me in the parking lot. "You're Joe Miller's grandson," she said, looking nervously over her shoulder. "I'm Rachel Chen. I work for the county clerk's office." Rachel explained that she'd processed the paperwork for Sunny Pines East, but something hadn't felt right. The approval had been rushed through without proper environmental assessments, and dates had been altered on several documents. "I tried to flag it, but my supervisor shut me down," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said some things are better left alone if I want to keep my job. I have 2 kids and a mother with Parkinson's. I can't lose this position." She slipped me a USB drive. "This is everything I could legally access. I'm sorry I can't do more." Rachel was risking her career to help a stranger fight an injustice. Her evidence provided the paper trail that led straight to the truth. Sunny Pines was building a $16 million development using land they had never legally acquired. The Sunny Pines Community Center was bustling that evening. Nearly 100 residents packed into the modest event hall, sipping punch and admiring a slideshow of luxury homes. Diane Reynolds stood proudly at the front in her signature red blazer, boasting about property values and new amenities. The residents had no idea their dream homes were built on stolen land. During the question period, an older woman in a simple floral dress timidly raised her hand. I was wondering if the board would reconsider the denial of my son's application for a wheelchair ramp. He's coming to live with me after his accident. And Diane cut her off with a wave of her hand. As I've explained twice now, Mrs. Carter, ramps alter the architectural aesthetic of the neighborhood. Perhaps Sunny Pines isn't suitable for people with those kinds of needs. The woman's face flushed with humiliation as several audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Diane moved on without a second glance. Her voice honeyed again as she discussed the new tennis courts. I took a deep breath and walked down the aisle. "Excuse me, I need to discuss this development." Diane's smile faltered before quickly returning. "We'll take questions after the presentation," she said dismissively. "This can't wait," I replied, stepping onto the small stage beside her. I explained who I was and showed the original land survey from 1910 alongside the updated 1978 survey confirming the boundary had never legally changed. According to these documents, the eastern boundary spans nearly 80 acres more than current records show. That includes not only this new development, but also 20 existing homes and your community clubhouse. The room erupted in confused whispers. Someone knocked over a folding chair. "This is absurd," Diane interrupted. "We have permits. This development has been approved by the planning board." "Based on fraudulent documents," I replied. "My grandfather never signed any boundary changes. He was in the hospital when these were submitted." Gerald Fisher, the HOA treasurer, slowly stood up. A retired accountant with stooped shoulders and perpetually worried eyes, Gerald had always seemed like Diane's faithful lieutenant. But as he adjusted his glasses and examined the copies I provided, something changed in his expression. "These boundaries, they match the old creek bed," he said, his voice gaining strength. "That's where the property line used to be. I told you this didn't look right, Diane." A shocked silence fell over the room as everyone turned to look at their HOA president. Diane's voice rose. "This is a scam. He's trying to blackmail the HOA." Something inside me snapped. All the stories I'd heard the veteran forced out of his home, the 92-year-old who lost everything, Mrs. Carter being humiliated for wanting to care for her injured son, my grandfather's land stolen while he lay dying. I slammed my hand on the podium, my voice rising from somewhere deep inside. "You stole my grandfather's legacy. You've bullied the elderly, discriminated against veterans, and intimidated anyone who stood in your way. But you can't steal this community's soul." I threw the old survey maps onto the table, papers scattering across Diane's perfectly arranged presentation materials. "This ends now." The room fell silent. Then Mrs. Carter stood up, her hands shaking but her voice steady. "I want to see those documents." Others joined her. One by one, the residents came forward, examining the evidence, murmuring among themselves. "No," I said calmly to Diane, pulling out one last document. "This shows that your private home, Diane Lot Number 12, is located entirely on my family's property." A man in the back shouted, "You mean we could lose our homes?" Before I could answer, Diane slammed her hand on the podium. "This meeting is over. Everyone out. The board needs to discuss this privately." But the crowd didn't move. They no longer blindly followed her lead. The sun was rising when I heard engines outside the farmhouse. 3 white SUVs with Sunny Pine security emblazoned on the sides parked on my gravel road. 5 men in matching uniforms approached, their hands conspicuously near their holsters. One stepped forward and handed me a thick envelope. "Cease and desist," he said flatly. "From the Sunny Pines Homeowners Association." The letter claimed my property surveys were fake and demanded I withdraw all claims against the development. That afternoon, a district inspector appeared, citing me for faulty wiring, an outdated septic tank, and an unsafe porch railing violations that would cost thousands to fix. By evening, my water pressure had dropped to a trickle. The next morning, my electricity was completely cut off. I was being systematically isolated. The farmhouse grew cold as night fell. I sat in the darkness, eating cold beans from a can, jumping at every sound outside. The distant rumble of engines came and went. Were they watching the house? A lone dog howled across the fields, the sound emphasizing the absolute emptiness around me. I'd never felt so utterly alone, so vulnerable. This land that had always meant safety now felt like a trap. When I tried to order pizza just to have something warm to eat, the delivery driver called to say he couldn't find my address. Then my phone rang with an unknown number. "Good morning," Diane Reynolds' voice came through the speaker. "Enjoying the view?" "This is harassment," I said, anger rising. "Oh, but according to county records, real records, that driveway crosses through HOA common land. We're well within our rights," she replied sweetly. "The county commissioner plays golf with my husband." "The judge who signed your order? He came to my dinner party last month." She paused. "By tomorrow, you'll be cited for a dozen more violations. But there is a way out. Drop your claim. Sign over the disputed acres. We'll even pay you for your trouble." When I refused, she sighed. "You have until tomorrow to reconsider." I needed help. Mrs. Thompson's house was my first stop. She opened the door and immediately pulled me inside. "Did they cut off your electricity too?" she asked, horrified. "And water," I admitted. "They're trying to force me out." Her eyes narrowed. "Not on my watch." Joe was like a brother to me after Harold passed. This land isn't just yours, it's part of all of us who remember what Meadow Creek used to be. Mrs. Thompson called a name toward the back of her house. "Carlos, come meet Joe's grandson." Carlos Rodriguez emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. In his 60s, with salt and pepper hair and forearms corded with muscle, he nodded respectfully. "Carlos was your grandfather's farm manager for 20 years, Mrs. Thompson explained. "He knows every inch of that land. The eastern fields have the best soil," Carlos said, his voice quiet but firm. "Your grandfather would never sell them. Never." Carlos had continued to help maintain the farm after my grandfather's health declined, checking on the property weekly. "Those surveyors came 3 times, he recalled. Your grandfather ran them off twice. The 3rd time, he was too sick to get out of bed, but he called me. I told them they were trespassing. 2 weeks later, my grandfather passed away." Carlos and Mrs. Thompson gave me a list of named 15 families who had been fined for everything from unauthorized plants to allowing grandchildren to visit for more than 3 days. People who had lost their homes because they couldn't afford the relentless fines. Elderly couples, single parents, veterans. Diane doesn't just want land, Mrs. Thompson explained. She wants control. She's been pushing out anyone who doesn't fit her vision of what Sunny Pines should be. That day, I knocked on more than 24 doors throughout Sunny Pines. Most people were hesitant, at first afraid of retaliation, but when I showed them the original property documents and explained what Diane had done, something changed. Sarah Jenkins, a kindergarten teacher with warm eyes and a gentle smile, told me that Diane had made her dig up her tomato garden because vegetables weren't aesthetically pleasing. The Patel family had been fined $3,000 for a porch swing. The Johnsons were cited for painting their front door blue instead of beige. "It's not just the rules," one resident said. "It's how she enforces them. She drives around taking pictures of people's homes like she's running a prison." By nightfall, I had allies. Many allies. I called Walter Franklin. "Can we form a competing homeowners association?" I asked. "On your land?" "Absolutely," he said. "But what about the existing homes?" "That's where it gets interesting," I replied. The next morning, I printed 200 flyers. "Emergency community meeting your home may be at risk." I included a copy of the original property survey. That evening, the Sunny Pines Community Center, which, according to the accurate survey, was legally part of my land, was filled with nearly 100 families. Midway through my presentation, Diane burst in, fuming. "This meeting is illegal," she shouted. "Everyone needs to leave." "Or what?" Sarah Jenkins stood up. "More fines? Haven't you taken enough?" The room erupted in applause. Then Gerald Fisher, the HOA treasurer, stood up. His hands were trembling, but his voice was steady. "I have something to say," he announced. The room fell silent as Gerald described how, for years, he had watched Diane manipulate HOA finances, routing landscaping contracts to her brother-in-law's company at triple the market rate, charging administrative fees that went directly to her husband's consulting firm, and using HOA legal funds to fight personal battles. I was afraid to speak up, Gerald admitted, his voice breaking. My wife has cancer. We need the insurance. But I can't be part of this anymore. He handed me a flash drive. Financial records. All of them. I've kept copies of everything. Diane lunged forward. You traitor. You signed confidentiality agreements. Confidentiality doesn't cover fraud. Walter Franklin called from the back of the room. That night, 89 families joined our coalition. I woke up the next morning with no utilities and dwindling supplies. But I was far from alone. By mid-morning, a caravan of trucks and cars wound its way up my driveway. Carlos led the procession in his battered pickup, followed by at least 30 vehicles. People poured out carrying food, water jugs, generators, and tools. The cavalry has arrived, Mrs. Thompson announced from the passenger seat of Carlos's truck. While Carlos and a team of volunteers restored my power with generators and rigged a temporary water system, Sarah Jenkins organized a community kitchen on my front lawn. The Patel family brought enough food to feed everyone twice over. Walter arrived with news. The state attorney general's office is interested in our evidence, and I've filed for an emergency injunction based on utility tampering. By afternoon, news vans lined the road. Reporters interviewed residents about Diane's regime of fines and intimidation. The story quickly grew bigger than a land dispute. It became about a community fighting back against corruption. The next morning, 3 police cars pulled up. Diane stood next to them, arms crossed and smirking. It's time to face the music, she said as the sheriff approached. Mr. Morgan, there's been a complaint about trespassing, the sheriff began. I handed him my grandfather's deed, the original survey, and Walter's legal brief. As he reviewed the documents, Carolyn Mitchell from the county records office arrived, holding her own stack of papers. Sheriff Williams, we've recovered the archived surveys, she said. There was indeed a recording error. This property, all of it, legally belongs to Mr. Morgan. Diane's confident expression crumbled. This is ridiculous, she snapped. You're all in on this together. Sheriff Williams turned to her. Mrs. Reynolds, I need you to come down to the station. We have questions about these property documents and some financial matters the state attorney general has brought to our attention. As the sheriff guided Diane toward his patrol car, he paused. You know, Mrs. Reynolds, I've been getting HOA violation notices on my own home for years. Guess HOA rules won't help you much where you're going. A cheer went up from the gathered crowd. Some people clapped, others wiped away tears. Frank Delgado, the Vietnam veteran I'd met days earlier, had returned to watch. He raised his weathered hand in a salute as Diane was placed in the back of the police car. Mrs. Carter, who had been denied the wheelchair ramp for her son, stood quietly filming the entire scene on her phone. For the record, she whispered. As Diane was driven away, Gerald Fisher approached me, still looking nervous but standing straighter than before. What happens now, he asked. Some of us have our life savings in these homes. I'm not here to take anyone's home, I assured him. I want to make this right for everyone. 1 year later, I stood on the hill overlooking what used to be Sunny Pines, now renamed Meadow Creek Community. Children rode bicycles past colorful houses with garden beds full of vegetables and flowers. Sarah Jenkins, now our elected community president, waved as she led a group of neighbors on a tour of the nature preserve we'd established on the eastern fields. The wetlands my grandfather had protected were now a sanctuary for wildlife, with educational walking trails and observation points. Gerald Fisher, freed from Diane's influence, had become our treasurer, implementing transparent financial practices and reasonable maintenance fees. His wife's cancer was in remission, and he smiled more these days. Carlos Rodriguez managed the community garden where neighbors grew food to share with local food banks. Mrs. Thompson ran a weekly story hour for children, telling tales of what Meadow Creek had been like when she was young. Frank Delgado had moved back, his house now sporting a proper wheelchair ramp and a fence painted bright blue, his favorite color. Mrs. Carter's son had recovered enough to volunteer at the community center, helping other families navigate disability accommodations. Rachel Chun, no longer afraid, had been promoted at the county clerk's office and was helping implement new anti-corruption measures in local government. As for Diane Reynolds, she had accepted a plea deal on charges of fraud and embezzlement. The investigation had uncovered millions in misappropriated HOA funds and kickbacks from contractors. She and her husband left Meadow Creek, their reputation in tatters. The development that would have destroyed the wetlands was redesigned with environmental protection in mind. The homes were smaller but more affordable, with green spaces and community areas that brought people together rather than isolating them behind uniform beige walls. That evening, as fireflies began to dance across the fields, I opened my grandfather's old journal. On one of the last pages, he had written, "Land can be bought and sold, but a community's heart? That can never be stolen. Remember, Alex, some things are always worth fighting for." I closed the book and walked to the newly erected welcome sign at the entrance to our community. It read, "Welcome to Meadow Creek, a place worth fighting for." Below it, a small plaque bore my grandfather's name and the simple words, "The legacy lives on." I placed my hand on the weathered journal, feeling the connection to my grandfather and to this land that now belonged to all of us. Diane had tried to steal my inheritance. Instead, she had given me something far more valuable: purpose, connection, and a chance to honor my grandfather in the most meaningful way possible. We had reclaimed not just the land, but the heart and soul of Meadow Creek itself.